Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. We're very excited and grateful to have Jason joining us tonight. So just to give a little bit of background on the Foodshed Alliance, we are a nonprofit organization based in northwestern New Jersey that focuses on supporting farmers, feeding people, and protecting the environment. Through the impact of our programming, we're devoted to increasing farmland access and business viability for farmers in our region, rescuing surplus food from local farms and donating it to people facing food insecurity, and protecting the environment for everyone in our communities. We believe that the future of our health, our land, and our communities depends greatly on the viability of local farms. And it's this conviction that drives our work with farmers, consumers, agriculture professionals, community partners, people like you all, to rebuild a healthy food shed that supports our farmers, nourishes all people, respects the land, and strengthens our communities. We're so grateful to have Jason joining us tonight and you all to be here to learn more from him about leading a more sustainable life. So for those of you who are not familiar with Jason, although I'm sure a lot of you are, Jason co-founded Strategic Outpatient Services Incorporated in 1995, a company specializing in the development and management of outpatient imaging centers, and is currently serving as the company's CEO. Mr. DeSalvo has served on nonprofit boards, including Ethos Farm Project, Coral Reef Alliance, Tewksbury Land Trust, Jazz House Kids, and Hoopapalooza, also serving as the vice chairman of Montclair's New Jersey Planning Board while a resident there. Mr. DeSalvo holds a BS in Business Administration with honors and highest distinction from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and lives with his wife, Deborah, on Cold Brook Farm in Old Wick, New Jersey, where they regeneratively farm heirloom greens, fruits, nuts, and vegetables. And they have two wonderful adult children, Stephen and Juliet. So right before we get started here, everyone, I just want to say, Jason already hinted at it, but I'm going to make sure that all the participants have the ability to unmute yourself and jump in with a question. If you have one, I will also be monitoring the chat and I will ask it for you if you, for whatever reason, don't want to or can't jump in verbally. I'm also going to put Jason's email into the chat, and if you have any follow-up questions, you're welcome to email Jason directly. I will also put more information about the Foodshed Alliance, our website, and things like that in the chat. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining us, everyone, and thank you, Jason. Take it away.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I'll start with this disclaimer. I am a jack of all trades when it comes to this stuff, and as of yet, a master of none. So that said, Colebrook Farm and what my wife, Deborah, and I have done here has been an incredible journey. I'm going to start the program with about a 20-minute kind of almost chronological journey from where we were as suburbanites living in Montclair, a kind of conventional suburban living, to where we are today, and talk about sustainability, and then break that down into what really can be encapsulated into 4 different categories of things that we've done here that have helped us move toward a more sustainable life. And along the way, I'll be hopefully providing tips and information that can help you. And then there's plenty of time and room for questions. And after that 20-minute kind of general gestalt, we can go in a number of different directions depending on what you guys want. So we'll have to figure out how to communicate that when we get there, and then we'll round out the program based on where you all are most interested, because this is a multifaceted endeavor, and I don't want to spend time talking about stuff that the bulk of you don't want to hear. So I will say, let's see if I can, there we go. I want to start by thanking the Foodshed Alliance. As Tess just said, this is a great not-for-profit that works on sustainable food systems here in New Jersey. working with farmers to sustain both farming as well as, a healthy approach to agriculture and making sure people of all different needs have access to healthy, locally grown food. And if you don't know the Food Shed Alliance, check them out on their website and please support them. Deborah and I both do. It's a great cause and they're great people. So I always think it's important to frame a discussion, and this is our home. Okay, stunningly beautiful, precious, fragile, and finite. This was the first picture taken of the entire Earth without there being a photo montage. It was taken in 1972. I was 5 years old at the time, and I remember being shown this picture by either my grandparents or my parents, I'm not sure which, in Life magazine. And what amazed me was how small it looks. And my immediate reaction when seeing the Earth in this picture as a little boy was to think of a fishbowl, and how for a fish, that fishbowl is its entire world. This is ours. Everyone you've ever known, everyone that's ever lived, everyone that will ever live for our lifetimes, it's all happened right here. We're going to be talking about sustainability. So a definition of sustainable from the Oxford English Dictionary: able to be maintained at a certain rate or level. Well, given the finite nature of Earth, this, which is the typical historic graphical depiction of sustainable development or sustainability, I was taught this when I was in business school. This is how the three major components of nature, society, and economy come together to join at this beautiful intersection that we call sustainable development. There's only one problem. It bothered me it bothered me then, and it bothers me even more now. That beautiful blue ball that you saw a couple of slides ago is finite. And there's no way that we can sustainably keep doing anything that requires resources from nature, right? And if you think about it, more often than not, in humanity's history, of these three spheres, we've tended to neglect both nature and society in favor of economy, at least in Western cultures. The native peoples of our land, as well as many other indigenous peoples in other parts of the world, didn't balance things this way. They took more of this approach, which I consider to be a more sustainable depiction of sustainability, right? Where you have these three spheres, they're the same spheres, the same actors, if you will, but they're done in a nested fashion in a way that's almost hierarchical, putting nature as the most important thing, society secondarily, and smallest and least important economy, making the statement that without taking care of nature in a sustainable manner, we really don't have much of anything. And that work was done on a scholarly level by a guy named Giddings in 2002, where he compared what historically had been, in his words, weak sustainability with what he was offering as quote unquote strong sustainability, and really making the argument that you need to focus on systems and presenting these themes as nested within where nature has the dominant weighting and our ability to care for it, nurture it, and sustain it. So, as I said, we were living in a fairly conventional suburban life. This is our prior house in Montclair back in 2011. It was built on spec before the bubble broke in 2008. It sat vacant until 2011 when we bought it. By 2019, our kids were fully grown. We'd already added solar panels. You can kind of see them up on the roof on the left. That was the south face of the house. We re-landscaped using all native plants, thanks to Deb's insistence on doing that. I was still a green lawn guy. We'll get to that later. All native plants. We were both driving electric cars. But we still both had this feeling that we needed to do more, that the state of the world was such that we wanted to lead a life that both we would be proud of and maybe even push the envelope a little bit in terms of putting it all together in a way that we could create a sustainable life. Margaret Mead, one of my favorite quotes: "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." That's the theme of this presentation, right? I'm not sure how many of you are on this, but what I will say is waiting for our political leaders, town leaders, government, non-government groups to lead the charge to change things has never worked. They reflect us. They don't really lead us. So with even the movements that are going on now with climate change or what have you, if we want to lead a more sustainable life, it's up to us to be that change. And if we are that change and we influence others, that will become a movement that will generate tremendous power. So we set out to create what we call a regenerative homestead that might be an example and an inspiration for others. Our goals were a home that would minimize its impact on the environment in all reasonably possible ways, revitalizing the surrounding land and environment for all living things, not just us, creating biological systems that would reinforce one another and improve the health of the land over time, utilizing regenerative organic agriculture, a conservation and rehabilitation approach to farming that focuses on maximizing topsoil health, increasing biodiversity, improving the water cycle, enhancing the ecosystem, and increasing resilience to climate change. Now, for full disclosure, that last one was not one of our original goals. We originally started looking at homes that we could renovate and make more environmentally sustainable, perhaps 3, maybe at most 5 acres. We wanted to have a small vegetable garden. And then we came out here to Tewksbury and fell in love with a property that was 43 acres. So, thus the regenerative farming. With 43 acres of woods, wetland, and agricultural land, that's that big oval in the front there, that's 13 acres. And that had been farmed conventionally for over 60 years. I put conventionally in quotes because it has never made sense to me that we call farming with chemicals and non-organic soil inputs conventional. It only became conventional in the 40s as large companies that used to make munitions during the war, they needed to turn to other things to make money, and they figured, hey, we can create fertilizers. By the way, fertilizer and gunpowder are very similar, right? So it was a way of continuing the production that had happened during the war, and that became quote unquote conventional. And it's completely changed our agricultural system. This is the way the land lays out. You can see the borders of our property. And we bought it in October of 2019. That's actually me and Deb on closing day. We closed a couple of hours earlier. Not really sure why we were smiling. We were a lot more broke and about to start the largest project of our lives. But at that moment, it was all smiles. So the land where we were going to build our home and grow our food was previously used to conventionally grow GMO corn and soybeans for commodity export. The soil was completely dead. If I dug in it, it was hard clay. You didn't see an earthworm. You didn't see an insect. It was just dead. In partnership with Jay Vogelaar, the young man on the right of Riverbend Farms in Far Hills, New Jersey, we began managing the field using regenerative organic techniques on January 16th of 2020. Nature being the incredibly resilient system that it is, by June 17th, 2020, after less than 6 months of not messing with it and putting chemicals or synthetic fertilizers or what have you on it, our break crop of oats and crimson clover was there hard at work regenerating the soil and removing toxins. We started construction on our farmhouse in July. This was the day of our barn raising, and this was August 24th, 2020. And that evening, a rainbow came out, and we kind of thought that was a good omen. By mid-October of 2020, we've already plowed under a second cover crop that was planted, and we've planted einkorn wheat here that you can see in the foreground. That'll be harvested in July of 2021. Work on the farmhouse is progressing beyond. That's New Year's Day, 2021. Our first batch of native plants arrived on April 23rd, 2021. And it was great to finally, even though we weren't living here yet, we're still building the house. Deb and I were finally starting to get native perennial plants into the ground, and we're finally starting to really do something with the land surrounding the house. And when we weren't planting, one of us was hard at work hand weeding the field. And let me tell you, hand weeding a 13-acre grain field, I'm a competitive athlete my whole life and an endurance athlete, and it takes something out of you. But it was really good, wholesome work. July 15th, 2021 was our first heirloom grain harvest. And because we manage Colebrook Farm organically, and there are no other organic small grain farmers nearby, we had to buy our own combine. Yes, that is a 1988 case combine that we purchased. I will say, for anyone listening, one of the reasons we were willing to do it is we make this combine available for anyone within a reasonable distance of where we are to use, as long as they farm organically. Because this is one of the biggest barriers to entry into small grain. These things are expensive and cumbersome to use. So this is a local resource that we purchased, and hopefully more people will take us up on that. By the way, it wasn't in our budget. So between farm chores, land stewardship, and our day jobs and managing contractors and suppliers, remember, we were doing all this during COVID. We were working 16-hour days regularly. And the key to retaining our safety was being thankful, making time for one another, and having some fun. And on the left, you have one of our favorite paintings, Christina's World by Andrew Wyeth. And then there's Deborah's World on the right. We were walking down at the end of the field one day, and Deb said, "Oh, wait, let's take a picture." So that's one of the kinds of quirky things we would do to keep ourselves sane during building the farm. We started moving in on December 22nd, 2021. We'd unpacked enough boxes to host 10 for Christmas Eve 2 days later. I don't know why we thought that was a good idea, but we did it. By April of 2022, we're getting our bee enclosure set up with the guys from EcoBee. They're out of Morristown. They manage bees for property owners in an organic way, and they're wonderful to work with. The spring weather in 2022 now allowed us to finally start our permaculture installation. Because it was still leftover labor shortages from COVID, Deb and I ended up doing almost everything ourselves. We planted literally thousands of trees alone by ourselves. There's the permaculture installation getting going, the house in the background, our raised vegetable beds, and the barn in the background. That's our bee enclosure in between the house, and in the foreground, that is actually our septic field. And rather than just have it be a lawn, which most people do, we planted it to native wildflowers, which seem natural to us, right? Put the bees right in the middle of a wildflower garden. I actually had to work to convince the town assessor that that should be agricultural land, not house, because she had never assessed a septic field as agricultural land before. She had always treated it as part of a home. I sent her this picture and she giggled and wrote back, it is. So practicing regenerative agriculture and permaculture immediately made Colebrook Farm a much healthier, more biologically diverse and vibrant environment for others too. That's really part of Deborah and my mission. This is not just about us. It's about the surrounding land and the environment and these amazing creatures that we share it with. monarch caterpillar on the left, owls that were right on the borderline of ours and one of our wonderful neighbors' property. And that's the offspring of the owl. That's our quote unquote backyard. So our permaculture design, which was done to figure out how to situate the house, where the heritage grain area would be, define kind of where we were going to do our pollinator and wildflower meadow, just kind of lay out the overall land. This was drawn up on July 10th, 2020. This is what actually happened. June 22nd, 2022, just shy of 2 years later. It literally came out almost exactly as planned, which I'm pretty amazed by. It's now December of 2023, a bit more than 4 years after we started our journey. And the most important impacts we've made thus far towards living a sustainable life with the lowest possible impact on planet Earth have been building a zero energy home that over the past 12 months has actually generated 6 megawatts more than we used. And since we both drive electric cars, that includes all of our driving as well. We converted the 13-acre agricultural field to regenerative organic management. We are just actually now starting the process of becoming organically certified or organic certified. Utilizing permaculture for all landscaping of the 2 acres surrounding our farmhouse, we have also planted thousands of native plants throughout the property. I think over 2,000 at last count. And we adopted a whole food plant-based lifestyle, which we actually didn't expect when we first moved here, but between growing so much great food ourselves and some health issues that we'll talk about in a bit, we decided to go whole food plant-based in terms of the way we ate. So the key features of our zero energy home. Well, these were supposed to come up slowly. They didn't. So anyway, I'm just going to run through these very quickly. There's a solar power array with battery backup. We have ground source heating that most people refer to as geothermal. So heating and cooling is done with geothermal loop and ground source heat pumps. The home is all electric. We don't use any fossil fuels. There's no natural gas, no propane, no oil whatsoever. We can go completely off grid. We use cellulose insulation, something called T-studs for exterior framing that minimizes thermal bridging. We use zip exterior sheathing with rigid insulation, also for better insulation in the exterior walls. We used a metal roof because metal roofs don't use petrochemicals like asphalt shingles. They can be recycled when they're done, and they last as much as 100 years. We used upcycled redwood siding, pieces of redwood that were used for other purposes that got glued together and created a siding that was used on the house. Triple pane windows and doors, insulated slab and foundation wall, heat pump for all of our hot water, locally sourced building materials wherever possible. Everything was sourced from 500 miles or less away from the house. Zero VOC materials throughout the house, LED lighting, a 2,500-gallon rainwater catchment system, Energy Star appliances throughout, an EPA-rated fireplace that can actually heat the entire home if for some reason we did run out of backup battery power and we were off grid. Recycled and upcycled interior furniture and furnishings, all natural interior furnishings, like everything was wool, cotton, latex, no oil or petrochemical oriented foams or anything like that in the house. Permaculture-based groundwater recharge, redundant systems for water and heat, 248-amp car chargers, and natural local stone for walkways and patios and a gravel driveway. The things that we did with regenerative organic agriculture, everything in regenerative organic agricultural systems is about building the soil, about keeping the soil healthy. This picture that's our farm. That's a recent cover crop on the right. Our last non-organic input was January 16th, 2020. Break crops and cover crops we use for transitioning when we were going from conventional management before we managed the farm to the way we do now. We didn't spray the whole field with glyphosate and then start over. We took the more arduous path of multiple successive break crops and cover crops and a lot of hand weeding. We grow small grains for human consumption instead of growing grains for export for commodity. We practice minimal tillage. We go into the field as little as possible. We've had 18-month periods where we haven't had to till the field since we've been here. Multi-species cover cropping, hand weeding, all natural organic soil inputs. Our soil organic matter increased from under 1% when we bought the property to over 4% already. We hope to get that up north of 6% in the coming years. We work with River Valley community grains. Why is community emphasized? Because growing things that human beings eat in an organic, regenerative manner builds community. We're a local farm. We sell into local markets. We get to meet people this way. We get to build community this way. And the money that we're making, we're putting right back into the community here instead of having it go overseas or to a completely different part of the country. That's one of the ways, by the way, that the Food Shed is a wonderful, wonderful organization in terms of revitalizing our local food shed. We choose our harvest date based on the way our grains taste, which is rare. A lot of people use a moisture meter, and when it's dry, they harvest. We do that. But I'm also willing, and Deborah's also willing to risk it a little bit and harvest a little bit early with a little moisture left so that the grain doesn't become overly dry and desiccated and lose its flavor. Partially because of that, our grains have been featured in many prestigious area bakeries, including Blue Hill at Stone Barns, which is owned and run by Dan Barber, who is an absolute ingredient fanatic. And he sources and ingredients by taste. And he runs a 2-star Michelin restaurant up in Tarrytown, New York. And earlier this spring, our grains were actually featured there for their bread products. That was only our second harvest. That was our Glen wheat. Permaculture and native plant practices and achievements. Our 2-acre permaculture landscaping includes well over 100 different plants, trees, shrubs, bushes, and grasses. Everything exists for a synergistic purpose that either feeds us or other living creatures. We used innovative designs for our house location, rainwater catchment, groundwater recharge, and septic field. We've planted over 2,000 native trees, shrubs, and plants to the 43-acre property. Our landscape provides over 50 edible perennial vegetables, fruits, berries, nuts, and herbs. Now recognize those are perennial vegetables, fruits, berries, nuts, and herbs. So that means we don't have to disturb the soil year after year when we harvest that stuff. We add compost, those things keep growing for many, many years. And the increase in both the quantity and diversity of life here is absolutely astounding. It is a completely different place than that picture that I first showed you of that monoculture barren landscape. Whole food, plant-based lifestyle. I alluded to that. And when we're talking about sustainability, the most significant thing that we do as humans, other than sleep, is pretty much eat. And our eating has a profound effect on the planet now that there are over 8 billion of us. On the left is Deb and me in June of 2022, both packing 30 pounds or more than the picture on the right of us in July of 2023. just after having gone whole food plant-based in July of 2022. So that was about a year later. We did that in July of 2022 for some health reasons for me. We decided to eat an entirely plant-based diet. By the way, this picture, that bread is baked with 100% whole grain from Colbrook Farm. So based on science, what do you think the rank order for the positive impact we've made on planet Earth from greatest to least for those four major categories we've worked on thus far, right? So regenerative agriculture, the net zero house or the zero energy home, permaculture and native plants, and the fourth being our changing to a whole food plant-based lifestyle. If you want to put that in the chat real quick, anyone that cares to do it, which one you think would be the most important, we're going to rank order them in a second. And maybe, Tess, if you'd be good enough to let me know if anyone does take me up on it.
Absolutely. You know, I can also put it, there's a poll option. We could do that if you want. If you could just rattle off those options again.
Okay. So the zero energy home,
Okay.
the permaculture and native plants, converting the 13-acre farm field to regenerative agriculture, and whole food plant-based lifestyle. And if you're looking at your screen carefully, like a bozo, because I'm a tech invalid, I have already given you what is the fourth. So that is actually the least, which I ended up being shocked by the way, and I could have saved a lot of money had I known that.
Okay, I think I just sent it. You guys let me know if you see that. Oh, here we go. There we go.
I see the poll.
We've got a couple people in the chat too. Native plants, whole food plant-based, regenerative agriculture.
All right, the point's been made. Let's move forward. All right,
Great.
so the least important thing we did in terms of sustainability for the planet was actually build the zero energy home and drive electric cars. It's amazing, but it's true. Of all the things we've done, that was the least important. Not saying it's not important, right? But if you were only going to do one of them, this would be the last one you'd do. Next, native plants and permaculture. Second, converted to regenerative organic agriculture. Now that one has these two, number 2 and 3, they both have a very, very big impact. And that's good, because when we talk later about things that you can do, it's a lot easier to do number 3 than it is number 4, unless you're planning on moving and building a new home. Number 2, if you own a farm, it is a lot of work, but that has a massive impact because you're talking about a lot of land. And if you don't farm in a regenerative organic manner, you're talking about a lot of very energy intensive soil inputs and things that actually create global warming or cause global warming. Yeah, this blew my mind. And I did not know about this when we moved here. I only learned about this after I started eating this way for health reasons. And it is literally the single most impactful thing any human being can do to help the planet have a more sustainable future. Now, that doesn't mean you have to do what Deborah and I did, which is go 100% whole food plant-based. But moving toward a more plant-forward diet, maybe you start with 1 day a week, like vegan Mondays, they call it, or something like that. Maybe you do it 2 days a week, but the more we as a species move away from animal agriculture, the far lesser impact we'll have on the planet. And by way of example, if we could go to a place of 100% humans eating plants rather than animals, we could free up a landmass the size of the continent of Africa, because we'd be cutting out the middleman. Rather than growing food to feed animals to feed us, we'd be growing food to feed us, which is just a direct path for the calories to come from the ground into our bellies and sustain us. So that blew my mind. That is the summary of what we've done at Colebrook Farm. I can stop here for questions. And then what I've done is I have subset kind of presentations that talk about each one of those 4 categories and start to delve into things that you can individually do. And we can talk about the nuances of all these things and that. And so really, I'll open up the floor to questions, either verbally or through the chat, and then we'll go wherever you want to go. We can talk about any one of those 4. We can talk, about building the house. Just because they're rank ordered in terms of the way they are for sustainability doesn't mean that if all of you guys want to talk about number 4, which was the house, I'm happy to do it. All of these things are good for thinking about sustainability. Yay, we have a poll.
Awesome. So yeah, so if everybody wants to just fill that poll out, and we can kind of use that to focus on the next part of this. I see Iris has their hand raised. So Iris, if you want, I don't know if that was on purpose, feel free to jump in with your question. In the meantime, Margaret asked, do you open your farm for people who want to visit?
Yes, I'm glad someone asked that. Tess and I had talked about that. You can ping me via email, and we are not, in other words, we don't sell stuff on the farm. We're not a public farm. However, one of the reasons Deborah and I did this is to help other people grappling with some of these things, because we are an incredibly resourceful species. When you point to something that's already been done and say, this is how you do it, other people can adopt it very quickly, and they can also often think about how to do it better. So yes, we do open up our farm to visitors. I can't say more than 2 or 3 weeks have gone by since we've lived here that someone hasn't come to visit to look at either the architecture, the plumbing system, the farming methods, the grain, the permaculture installation, the birds. So absolutely, by all means.
Thank you. We have another question in the chat, recommendations for resources to learn about sustainable farming.
Recommendations for resources to learn about sustainable farming. There's a bunch of them. And I can get an email to whoever did that if you send that to me with more specific recommendations. But off the top of my head, one of the best resources is Rodale. Rodale is right over in Pennsylvania. They are from where I live. They're less than an hour away. They've got a great website, and they have a wealth of information about both organic and regenerative. And there are, I can think of 5 or 6 other great websites that I can point you to if you shoot me an email. I mean, by the way, even the Food Shed Alliance's website will get you going on thinking about sustainable food systems, and they have partners that run sustainable farms. And so, that's another that just immediately comes to mind. Ethos Farm Project, which is right up the road in Long Valley. I'm a board member there. They run an incredible regenerative organic farm. And during the season, they're open on Friday and Saturday as a farm market. And in addition to buying great produce there, you can also learn a lot about farming there through just actually going and talking to the farmers who are at the farm market. That's an incredible place too, and it's a place you can go see, feel, and touch. How are we doing on our poll?
We are neck and neck for whole food plant-based diet and native plants and permaculture.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So whole food plant-based diet and native plants and permaculture. Very cool. If I were a betting man, I would have bet the two others. And I spent hours preparing those. So we'll do those another time. I'm going to start with native plants and permaculture because that's kind of a segue into whole food plant-based diet. And I don't know, you may be able to see this, Tess. Can you see whether or not Ron Weiss is on this webinar?
Yes, I am here.
Okay. All right.
If I can just say one word, because I've got to, even to the audience listening, even though I am a close friend of Deb and Jason, and I know all of this, I am overwhelmed listening to the entire story, completely sewn together, and I'm very filled with gratitude that that I'm able to collaborate with you guys and that you are friends.
Well,
thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Weiss. And I may lean on you when we get to the whole food plant-based part for some questions that may come up or what have you. You got it. He happens to be our physician and a beautiful human being. He runs Ethos Farm Project. Well, he runs Ethos Family Practice. And when I get to whole food plant-based, I'll tell you that story. So we're going to start with native plants and permaculture. Are they still neck and neck, or was there a number one, Tess?
Checking now. Real quick before we start, we do have a couple other questions if you don't mind.
Sure.
Just fielding them really quick. So Sandy asked, maybe jumping ahead a little bit, but wondering if you're planning on seed exchanging at some point.
Okay. We will have some seed that we keep from native flowers. We will also eventually get around to reserving seed or from our grains for future sowing. Right now we don't. Someday we hope to.
Okay, thank you. So the poll is still neck and neck, just
okay.
So you know. What a couple more questions from Nora, wondering where you purchased your native plants and how you chose them. And maybe we'll be getting into that in the native plants and permaculture.
Big fans of Toadshade Wildflower Farm here in New Jersey. They are fantastic. And the owner, Deb, if you're on and want to unmute and tell a little story about them, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, hi. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Jason, you're kicking butt, honey.
Oh, thank you, sweetie.
Yeah, so Nora asked about where we purchased our native plants and how we chose them. It was many years ago. We'd been fans of Randy Eckel, Dr. Randy Eckel at Toadshade Farm in Frenchtown, New Jersey. She's a phenomenal resource, an all-around wonderful human being. She helped us with our native seed mixtures for our swale and berm. She was a guiding light even back in Montclair, and has grown her business over 40 years. So we kind of we bought things that we liked. We bought things that we knew would be successful. I mean, native plants, you can't really go wrong. But we also got 1,200 plants through a grant through New Jersey Audubon and the Xerces Society. So, and that was a ridiculous thing because that came in, the grant came through and we got our plants at the end of June of 2022, and had to cut
During a horrific drought.
during a horrific drought. So, you know, I think I don't want to take up too much time.
No, we're good. I just wanted, I mean, I wanted the plug about Randy and, you know, and them. And if there's any other ones that you want to mention now, otherwise we can get an email to people.
Yeah, the all the other things in our, you know, I think most of the native plants were then New Jersey Audubon or Toad Shade Farm.
Cool. Thank you, love.
Yep.
That's my partner in crime. And truly the reason I'm here, because like I mentioned earlier, I like my lawn with no weeds kind of guy until Deb enlightened me. So when they say, you know, it's just, I couldn't thank her enough. All right, permaculture, native plants. So again, you've seen this slide already, you've seen that slide, and you've seen this slide. What is permaculture, right? So permaculture stands for permanent agriculture, and it draws inspiration from nature to design and develop synergistic systems that foster biological diversity, resilience, natural productivity, sustainability. Everything planted serves as food source for either us or the creatures with which we share the land. There's no ornamental landscaping at Colebrook Farm whatsoever. And again, here you see the younger wildflower meadow that surrounds this was year 2 as opposed to year 3 photo you saw before. Those are the bee boxes behind it. So this was our permaculture plan, the overall design, which laid out, we worked with an incredible resource. You can see it in the lower left there, Adam Dussin of 100 Fruit Farm. He's right over the border in Pennsylvania, again, less than an hour away, and he's a permaculture designer. And he worked with us to figure out the best use for our land within the areas surrounding the house, right? The earlier work was done by a company named Terragenesis. They worked on the overall blocking of the entire property, talking about it as a ecological resource and what we needed to be doing as stewards of it. And then we brought Adam in to help inform that area that you see carved out of the heritage grain crop area. That is our permaculture design. And this is it blown up. And literally what Adam works with you to do is do a design that on the right, every single plant is called out. And then there is a guide that he gives you that is, I think ours was 50 or 70 pages long, that explains how to plant it, how to maintain it, what tools you need. You know, I want to call it the idiot's guide to permaculture. And thank God we had it because we were absolute newbies at this, right? So this is, can you see my cursor? Can you see that moving around?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I may need that in a bit, but for now, I just want to make sure you can see it. So again, this is our whole site design. Oops, I'm going backwards. This is what it looks like in the flesh. But this is what it looked like before we started permaculture, as you saw before, right? So permaculture informs everything. And first you start with the macro level stuff, including telling the architect where you're going to site the house and barn for ecological reasons. So our house and barn was sited where it was, partially, so that it was south facing, because you can see those solar arrays. We had to be facing due south for maximum efficiency. The other thing was, well, I'll show you that in another slide, actually. Then there was hydrology, dealing with water flow, right? Because we're on a slight slope here. how were we going to lay things out to make sure that we were dealing with bioswales, rainwater catchment, groundwater recharge, and diversified habitat creation. That was all done through land contouring. That's part of good permaculture design. And these were all things where the land was actually sculpted and shaped to flow in those passages so that it went away from things that we didn't want to have water in, like our vegetable gardens and raised vegetable beds and our driveway and our fruit trees. And then there's living systems, food and habitat. A windbreak, because the wind howls out of the northwest here, coming down the mountain from Hell Mountain, and comes right in this direction that would pummel into our house and fruit trees. And while some airflow is important in a fruit orchard, too much can also damage them and break limbs. That's where our fruit orchard was sited, so that there is enough airflow coming from those northwesterly winds to prevent rot and mildew. Our beehive, as you know, was put back in the septic field. You can see what was the septic field is that area. Pollinator gardens to support the bees, to support other pollinators. Pond and water loving plants, right? By creating ways that water flows into certain areas, you also have the opportunity to create habitat for water loving plants. Permaculture puts the plants where they'll thrive, as opposed to kind of hoping for the best and planting stuff where you want. It creates a living system. Perennial food crops. And you'll see when we look at food crops within our permaculture enclosure, okay, if you consider that both that windbreak is planted with perennial plants, the blue one, and the fruit orchard are also perennial plants, right? They're fruits, windbreak, and the windbreak also has things like hazelnuts and other berries is part of that windbreak, right? Well, the other perennial food crops are planted in these areas. You can see a tremendous percentage of the landscape is devoted to food, and not just plants that are food, but perennial food, perennially growing plants. And those are annual food crops in those pink areas. So, you know, things like tomatoes, peppers, the things that you have to plant that last one season or less. And that's a minority of our permaculture because they're much more labor intensive. And they're also, they disturb the soil more, and they're frankly less, well, they're less sustainable, right? You know, the more you disturb the soil, the more inputs you need, the more you're doing work and labor that requires a less sustainable way of being. Finally, compost. So all of that is part of this permaculture design. And by practicing permaculture and planting native plants, it ensures that Colebrook Farm is a healthy environment, not just for us, but these are all pictures from Colebrook Farm. Thus far, just about, I'm pretty sure almost every picture that I've shown is from our farm. Again, the owls in the backyard, pollinators, and yes, bobcat. That was taken by our trap camera. I've stitched together two pictures because he was in the middle of two frames, but that's back by the brook. So multiple diverse habitats with no traditional lawn, low mow. You can see in this foreground, this is a multi-species mix. This was kind of early summerish, right? By late summer, this area in the foreground, you can see this area is a little lower. That's a pathway for us to walk on that we do mow, but we mow it somewhere between 4 to 6 inches. We don't ever mow it down like golf course height. And then this area here that I'm showing you with my cursor, that's already growing higher. By late summer, that's as much as a foot tall, okay? It's the same mix, but it has wildflowers in it, clovers in it. And as you let it grow, you're creating three-dimensionality in your landscape. And that creates, if you think about three-dimensional space, volumetrically, you've created tons more habitat for insects and pollinators, and then other living creatures that live in there. And so you're kind of creating an ecosystem instead of just a very sterile lawn. And this in turn leads to magic that we get to witness all the time. This happened, it's funny, this next sequence happened. I caught this picture, and then this juvenile red-tailed hawk swooped out of my view. Deb happened to be in the house or working in the garden. I think she was right outside, and she caught this. This is the same red-tailed hawk. And this is actually in that area that I say grows higher as the summer progresses. He's got a bowl. You can see the pollinator butterflies in the background, right? And that's what permaculture and the kind of permascape that we've created here aims to do, is to create a thriving ecosystem for all living things, not just humans. And if we start thinking about our homes that way, instead of the very typical way, imagine the power of that, right? Look out, when you walk out tomorrow, look at your lawn if you have one, and think about that slide that you just saw and the one before it, right? The power that we have to make positive change right in our own backyards by just a little switch of our imagination and trying to look at our own little land, however, whether you're fortunate enough to have 43 acres like Deborah and I, or you have a quarter of an acre, or you even have a fire escape that has a couple of plants on it. The choices we make can have a tremendously positive effect on nature. So one of permaculture's key things is putting things that you use regularly in close proximity to where you use them. This right over here, all the way at the left, that's the door that leads into our kitchen. Right here is our herb spiral, okay? And it's planted three-dimensionally, so as you get higher, the things that need to be drier are up top. The things that need more moisture are down lower. And the things that need southern exposure are on this side. The things that need a bit more shade are over here. Then these are our raised vegetable beds. Our tomato plants are back here, all within walking distance because we have to tend to them regularly. Over here, we have more herb garden. We've got perennial onions right here. So all of these things that we cook with regularly are right outside the kitchen door. And they were deliberately planned that way. This is our front. So this is a bed of native perennial strawberries. Is it a ground cover? Yeah. It's not Pachysandra. It's not English ivy. It's functional. It's eaten and loved by us, and it's loved by pollinators too. Again, multi-purposes, using land for multiple reasons rather than wasting it. We could have had a nice half-acre green lawn that I guess we might have made a putting green, but instead we planted it with native wildflowers to surround our bee enclosure so that this land is giving maximum benefit, which also allows us to have honey as a natural sweetener. By the way, honey is not a typically whole food plant-based food. It is one of the exceptions that Deborah and I make to that diet because it's grown right here. It comes right here from Goldberg Farm, and we use it sparingly, but comes right from there. During the summer, we grow lots of food, glorious food, berries, cucumbers, carrots, broccoli, lots of berries. So jumping over to native plants and why native plants. This is something that Deb told me again and again and again. And I was working long hours running a business, and she was doing most of the landscaping in our old house, and she wanted to make it a native plant environment. And I said, sure. But I never really understood why until she sat down with me one day and actually went through what is essentially the bones of this presentation that you're about to see. And it was like one of those light bulb moments where I was just like, how did I not get this? And I am forever grateful to her for teaching me this, because it really changed my whole view of what my job is as a person who has any degree of property. So native plants create biodiversity. They're a natural part of the food web. They're less demanding to take care of. They're less prone to disease. And they need less water once they're established, by the way. In the first couple of years, they need a lot of water, as all new plants do. It's a lesson we learned the hard way by planting thousands of native plants during the 2 worst drought springs we've had back to back in this part of New Jersey in over 20 years. So this is the food web, right? And you can see all the way at the bottom down here, native plants, okay? You can't build something sustainable with a poor foundation. If you want to build a tall building, you can't skimp on the foundation, okay? Now, by the way, under this is actually soil and regenerative soil health, right? So if you have crappy soil that's dead, your native plants aren't going to do well either. So all of this presupposes you're starting with healthy soil, and then you're planting native plants. And that's the basis of your food web. Why is that important? I'm just going to give one example. There are hundreds of them, but why what we plant matters, okay? These are calorie pairs on the left in a typical suburban development. They're beautiful, right? Look at those flowering trees. What could be better? It's springtime, okay? How many insect relationships do you think calorie pairs have? They have 2. There are 2 insects that have an affinity for calorie pairs, right? Now remember, I am going to go back. Remember, right above native plants, there are all these critters, insects, larval insects, fully grown insects, pollinators, bees, which then in turn get eaten, which then in turn get eaten, which then in turn get eaten. Ultimately, even above here, if you're not a plant-based eater, you could put humans, right? So if we're messing with the food web all the way down here and limiting what these critters have to eat, we're really messing with up here too, in a big way. So, back, there are 2 relationships. Oak. How many insect relationships do you think an oak tree has? 534. By the way, oaks are the most important trees in our part of the world for creating biodiversity. If you have only one tree to plant, oaks, okay? So look at the difference there. You're creating a habitat for 534 different species of insect life when you plant an oak. If you have a beautiful flowering calorie pair, you've created a desert. I never used to think about this. As a matter of fact, in our old house, we had calorie pairs in front of it that the town had planted, and I would look at it and say, aren't they beautiful? And Deb would say, I wish there were oaks. And until she explained all this to me, I never understood why. It's mostly about the food. Insects eat what they know. And the relationships between native plants and insects are thousands of years old. Thriving ecosystems are built on diverse and abundant food sources. The broader the bottom of our food pyramid, the healthier the ecosystem. Oh, there's a typo there. The healthier our food system, right? So when we import these ornamental plants that we think look beautiful in our yard, the insects have no idea what to do with them because they've never experienced them. Or worse, we import these beautiful plants that happen to bring insects that do know what to do with them, that come from another part of the world and happen to do catastrophic damage to the plants here that don't know how to defend against those insects. Perfect example would be the spotted lanternfly, right? So native plants, because it's bidirectional. Both the insects and the plants are in harmony. But it's also about location and material. Protection from predators, shelter, nesting material. So this is a common suburban yard. As a matter of fact, it was our common suburban yard when we bought that house back in 2011. Lots of lawn, non-native, by the way, you'll notice no weeds in the lawn either, or very few. Non-native ornamental plants, low biodiversity, offers little of value to the ecosystem and diminishes sustainability. This was after Deb got her hands on it, and it's now a thriving ecosystem. Minimal lawn, all native plants, high biodiversity, tremendous value to the ecosystem, and greatly improved sustainability. These are pictures from around that property. Joe Pieweed on the left. Deb knows the name of all these plants, I don't, but they're beautiful and they're native and loaded with larval insects. And interesting, people always cringe at insects, right? Well, this was the only house on our block in Montclair that you could sit on that front porch and not be eaten alive by mosquitoes in the summertime. Why? Because it's a thriving ecosystem. The things that eat the mosquitoes are there to eat them. Whereas in our other neighbors' properties, they were gone because they had one or two different types of shrubs and a lawn, and maybe some sitting water somewhere, which we all have, which had mosquito larvae, but there were no other insects or creatures to eat the mosquito larvae. Our backyard. These are some fantastic native plants. This will be posted. You can definitely get this. These are things that Deb's used all over our properties, things that we love. So things to improve your own yard's biodiversity and sustainability. Number one, minimize the lawn as much as possible. We have to get into our heads. Lawns are a desert. They may look beautifully green, but nothing of substance grows there. As a matter of fact, a true desert has far more species life than a suburban lawn. Replace any lawn that you must have. Maybe you live in a suburb or a housing development where you must have some lawn because of the rules. Well, wherever you can, use a low mow mix instead. You could still mow it, but at least you're getting multiple species, and maybe you can even let it grow long every now and then, or in certain pockets to create that three-dimensionality I was showing you and talking to you about. By the way, Sandy, if you're watching, yes, this is your photo as the background, and yes, I did remember to give you photo credit in the lower right. Use as many native plants as possible for the reasons we just went over. Go organic. Never treat your property with chemicals. Why would you want to kill living things? You're a living thing. And if you're killing living things on your property, if your kids or your pets or other living creatures in the neighborhood are going on your freshly pesticide-laden lawn, you're killing them too. So go organic. Mulch your landscape, right? So your beds and things, mulch them prodigiously. That allows three-dimensional soil life to be created and have shelter. And then leave leaf litter in the fall. Unless you're in a housing development where they make you remove the leaves, let the leaves fall and let the leaves stay on your low-mow grassy areas, if you will, on your beds. It will ultimately break down, and those are the very same nutrients that came out of the soil to become leaves from the trees that can now be recycled by nature. Think about the waste and the unsustainable nature of getting out your leaf blower, using the energy to blow your leaves. If it's a gas leaf blower, you're annoying everyone with the noise, putting that into and you're using petrochemicals, putting that into a big pile, hauling it to the curb, having the town come and haul it away to throw it in a dump versus just leaving it there. It's like we've migrated to these ways of being without thinking. But when you break it down and think about it, it doesn't make much sense. Nature will do a perfect job of reabsorbing that organic material and putting it right back where it came from and where it belongs, in the soil. Water less. Use less water. After they've been established, native plants are great for that. And grow some of your own food if you can. Maybe it's just a tomato plant on a porch. Maybe it's a raised box in your backyard. Maybe it's a whole permaculture installation like we have. But the more you can source local, organic, healthy food from your own property, the less it has to be transported to you, the less you have to go to the store to shop for it, the less money you spend. It's just a wonderful way to increase sustainability. Plant perennials whenever possible. They're less work. You don't have to replant them every year. Less soil disruption. Compost. That becomes, you take the things that you don't use from your kitchen, you compost it, you compost your plant waste, and it goes right back into the soil. Use an electric mower and yard tools whenever possible. We use the Ego brand. I love them. They're quiet. I'm not breathing in all of that crap when I'm doing my work, and they don't annoy the neighbors either. So it's a win-win-win-win. They're also much more efficient. Create three-dimensional spaces with a wide varieties of trees, shrubs, plant, and ground covers, right? Animals like to live in different spaces. They don't want to be confined to the 2-inch lawn that you have, or that, more three-dimensionality gives different kinds of creatures. Nesting birds have places to hide. Insects have places to go. There's shelter for, yes, rodents, mammals, things like that. Make your landscape a food garden. If possible, use permaculture techniques. The example I give is, as your ground cover, plant stuff that's going to grow things that you can eat. Plant beautiful flowering shrubs that also are going to grow fruit that you can eat. As we walk down our walkways in our permaculture garden, when things are in bloom, I can stop and pick gooseberries. I can go and pick strawberries, raspberries. It's all right there. And have fun, right? Use this as an opportunity to think about how you can give back to nature, right? We've taken so much as a species from nature. If we start to think about our little plots of land as a way to give back and try to fill as much of every square inch of it with things that don't just feed us, but feed other living creatures, imagine the effect that would have across all of society. So these are some organizations and websites that are great for talking about native plants. There's Toad Shade Wildflower Farm. A couple of others on there. You can take a screenshot of this if you want to. So I'll leave this up for a second. And by the way, Doug Tallamy, he's the guy. He's the guy. That book, Bringing Nature Home by Doug Tallamy. If you want 1 or 2 books to get you set on this path of how you can turn your home into something more sustainable, those are the books. A special shout out to Deb. Without you, I might still have been insisting on a perfectly manicured, weed-free lawn, no matter the environmental havoc it wreaked. You're forever an inspiration in all things natural and living in harmony with the earth, our home. I can't thank you enough.
Thanks, honey.
Yep. So our permaculture and native plants practices and achievements. I'm not going to do this because we went over this before in the other presentation, but that's that. So probably a good place to stop and break and ask questions about this segment of what we've been talking about.
This was amazing, Jason. First of all, I just have to say, I knew that oak trees were so important, but to have the number of over 500 relationships is like, wow,
It's
my mind is
insane.
blown a little.
It's insane. By the way, another great local, native black cherry. Um, they're amazing. They're right below it. As a matter of fact, John Park, who used to be at New Jersey Audubon, he prefers them to oaks. We disagree, Deb and me, and we used to joust with him intellectually about it, but that's another great local tree. Hickories, other great local trees. Walnuts, right? Guess what? They're all native, right? The reason they have, I want to point out, the reason there are so many symbiotic relationships there is because they both, the creatures and the plants, have grown in the same place, right? So those relationships have been created over thousands and thousands of years, and through evolution, they work together, and that's why you have 534 for the oak and 2 for the Callery pear, because it's an ornamental tree that was taken from somewhere else and relocated here. 10,000 years from now, it may very well have 500 host organisms, but not for a long time.
It's beautiful. I do want to call back really quick. We did, I missed a question earlier before we started this segment about starting off having a regenerative farm. Question for people who may have the land, to whom should someone turn first? Is there a farmer or certain resources that can help people turn their land into regenerative?
Oh, that's a great question. And it really depends completely on where the farm is located, what the farm has been historically, and ultimately what the landowner would like for their farm. Because you can approach regenerative agriculture in many different ways. At the end of the day, what regenerative agriculture is talking about doing is making that farmland more biodiverse, healthier, putting the microfauna back into the soil through a series of practices that really reinvigorate the soil and create the very, very bottom of the food web, right? Of the terrestrial food web, which is the soil. And everything comes from there. So it depends on where your farm is, because farming is intensely local, right? What works here on Colebrook Farm may not even work for someone in central New Jersey, certainly wouldn't work for somebody in the middle of the country or in California. So it's local. And certainly that's one of those things where you could start an email correspondence with me about your specifics, and we can get on the phone together, and with a little more information, we can really start to think about how to get you headed in that direction. Because, you know, there are a variety of ways that you can utilize your farmland in a regenerative, organic manner. The problem is that there aren't a lot of farmers yet completely well versed in this. By way of example, we tried very hard. The farmer that farmed our farm historically, he's an amazing farmer from the standpoint of conventional farming. He's tremendously successful. He's a lovely guy, and he runs one of the most incredibly complicated farming operations. He farms over 3,000 acres, all amongst these little parcels of land that are 10 acres here, 12 acres there, 7 acres here, 100 acres there. It's a logistical nightmare, and he does a great job, but he farms almost exclusively commodity GMO-based crops, right? We first tried to work with him because he had been farming our land for quite some time. We really wanted to stay with him, but he said, I can't farm organically in an economic manner. That's not functionally true, okay? And I hate saying that because he's a far better farmer than me and Deb. But there is a fabulous book, okay, grain by grain, by one of my favorite farmers, okay? Bob Quinn. If you want to read something that will make you smile, make you happy, and give you hope for this world, for regenerative agriculture, he's the guy that brought regenerative agriculture to Montana. Or was it Wyoming? Why do I always get this confused?
Montana, honey.
Montana, there we go. Just pulled him up. I always get those two states confused, whether it's Bob Quinn or anyone else that lives in either one of them. Anyway, he took part of his family's farm that had historically grown conventional grains, grains conventionally, and converted it organically, ultimately putting his entire 3,000 acre farm into regenerative organic agriculture. And he's an inspiration. He was one of the inspirations for this place. But if you're thinking about regenerative agriculture at all, read that book. Reach out to me and we'll get you going down a path and try to figure out a pathway for you to get enough knowledge to be dangerous like we've been. So hopefully that answers your question to at least get started.
That's great. We do have a couple more questions in the chat that I want to give to you before we move on to the next part. So someone just asked that they've read that you should not disturb native plants where they grow. So if they have a friend with land within 60 miles with abundant natives, would it be wrong to take plants from there and replant in their urban yard? And if so, can you explain why?
That's an interesting question, and it's a bit of a fallacy. It does depend on the plant, right? So it's plant specific. There are native plants that grow so vigorously, it's actually good every now and then to, take some portions of them out and replant them elsewhere because they spread, right? So it really does depend on the plant. So I can't give you, without knowing the specific plant, yeah, that one's fine to do or that one's not. Disturbing soil, it's all one of those things that it's a balancing act, right? An example that I'll give you related to our farm field. If you grow grain, unfortunately, you have to disturb the soil several times a year. There's no way to grow grain in an organic system without tillage, because otherwise it gets overrun by weeds, right? Now, is tillage good? No, that's disturbing the soil, right? Digging it up and turning it over. We practice minimal tillage, which means we go as shallow as we can and we do it as few times as we can to minimize the disturbance to our land. And would the land arguably be healthier if we planted it all to either, like the beautiful prairie that Dr. Weiss has up there at Ethos Farm? It's got 100 acres planted in native warm season grasses. That is healthier for the environment than what we do on our farm field here. But it doesn't feed any people. It feeds a lot of critters. And there's always a balancing act, right? So in that situation, if you're going to start a native plant installation at your house and you happen to have a neighbor who has native plants that also thrives in your community, and they've got the kinds of plants that can be divided without really harming things, I would make an argument that in that situation, it might be a good thing to do. But it's all case by case. And like approaching building this house and building our permaculture installation, everything requires thought. And far too often, if there's one thing to take away, other than that Margaret Mead quote that I started with about the power of us to make change, the other thing is think about your actions in advance of doing them. Don't do anything just because someone else has done it historically. The number of times we had experts in landscaping come and tell us to do something that ran completely counter to what would be healthy for our land, I can't even count, right? So the great thing is you're asking the question. The answer is a little bit more complicated than you probably want, but it depends on the plant and it might be very beneficial. And there are some plants that if you uproot them, they probably won't transplant at all. And you probably also damaged the remaining plant that you left behind. So I can't be that specific on that, but if you wanted to send pictures and identify the plants for us, Deb would probably be the person to answer that email, and I would forward it to her. But so that's the way I would approach it.
Thank you, Jason. We did have another question about solar panels, but maybe we can have that person email you.
I can do solar
directly.
panels real quick. If
Okay,
it's,
great.
yeah.
Yeah, it was just talking quickly about the installation of them and any recommendations you have around that.
Yeah, there is, get a really good solar installer, right? Because if you have a bad one, it's a nightmare. Do your research beforehand. Know, in other words, know what you want to get out of your solar system. And what I mean by that is, are you trying to completely power your house? Are you trying or are you trying to get solar to be virtuous, but do it at the least possible cost? Because installing solar on your home can be as simple as calling a company who will do all the work for you. You pay for essentially nothing. They do all the permits. They put solar up. They lock in the electricity rate that they charge you, and they own the solar panels, and you've leased them, right? You don't own them. And then you don't have to think about what kind of panels or whatever like that, but you don't own them. If you have to sell your house, it's a bit of a problem. You have to transfer the lease or what have you. The other alternative is to do what we did. We designed the house around the number of solar panels that we needed to create the energy that we needed to live the lifestyle that we live. So we literally worked with a solar installer where we gave a list of every appliance that we were going to have, every way we were going to create hot water, heating, cooling, what cars we drove that were electric, typical usage habits that we have. And they crunched all those numbers, and they figured out that we needed 72 380-watt solar panels. And then we designed the house to make sure there was enough roof space between the barn and the house to fit that. Totally different end of the spectrum. If you're working with a great solar power provider, they can do that for you. We worked with Ryan Builds. They're lovely people, truly good human beings. They're not the fastest, they're not the cheapest, but anytime there was an issue, they treated us exactly the way I would want to be treated as a person. So I can't say enough about them as people. There's another one called Green Power Solutions that's local here in New Jersey. I haven't used them, but I've heard great things about them. But really, going in, think about why you're installing solar. Make sure you have enough south-facing roof real estate, and then work from there. And again, you can ping me for some more details via email.
Great, thank you, Jason. So 2 more questions before we move on. Someone asked, how can we work on changing the local ordinances to include sustainable agriculture as you have?
Oh, God. It depends on the local, where that local is. Here where we live, I'm tremendously thankful for the farming that goes on, even though I don't love the fact that it's quote unquote conventional mostly, because absent that, this would be a community of subdivisions, and farming is an incredibly hard, noble pursuit. And so it's a very tough line for me to walk, because while I am a very strong believer in regenerative organic agriculture being one of the only ways we're going to be able to save ourselves from ourselves in terms of climate change, Because when you practice regenerative organic agriculture, you can actually create a carbon sink where your agricultural practices are absorbing more carbon than you're putting out into the atmosphere. When you practice conventional farming, between the soil inputs, the desiccation that happens, or the complete destruction of the soil microbiome, you are one of the biggest causes of climate change out there. We'll get to the bigger one next when we talk about whole food plant-based lifestyle, which is our eating habits. But I'm thankful for these local farmers that farm conventionally because they're still farming. And I'd rather have it be a farm than have it be a subdivision. And it's hard, thankless work, right? Farmers, they don't get paid nearly enough. The cost of food in this country is way too low. We used to spend close to 30 cents or 30% of our disposable income on food back at the turn of the last century, okay? We now spend less than 12%, all right? And that means farmers are getting paid a lot less. And that's not a good thing. Good food is expensive to produce. How you change ordinances, I think a better approach, remember that first slide about Margaret Mead? You work to create the demand for sustainable, regenerative, organic agriculture by educating your neighbor, by being on a webinar like this to realize the importance of seeking out local farms that already farm this way. Because what's going to drive the change in farming practices is far, far, far more likely, in my humble opinion, to be demand driven by consumers than to be trying to get a local town council to try to enforce different agricultural practices in a state like New Jersey, where pretty much our land use laws are do whatever the hell you want. I mean, really, our land use laws in New Jersey are pretty pathetic from a standpoint of stopping things that really hurt the environment, you know, on a grand scale. It's not like Europe where they can legislate like that and get a lot of horsepower behind them. So as much as I'd love to say, go and speak up at meetings, I think a better thing to do is explain what you're learning here today to 10 friends. Stop buying food from farms that don't farm this way. If you have a friend that has a farm, try to excite them about turning their farm over this way. Have them come visit Coldbrook Farm. Have us tell them our story. Have them see that two nudniks from Montclair, New Jersey that had absolutely no farming experience whatsoever, within 3 years, had created a farming system on their property that allowed grain to be grown regeneratively, organically, not yet certified, mind you, but it will be, that got into one of the best kitchens from one of the pickiest chefs in this entire movement, right? So if we could do that, anyone can do it. You just have to set your mind to it, assuming you have the land and the means. I mean, I'm taking a whole lot of things for granted, but if you're a young person starting out, work with people like the Food Shed Alliance or at Ethos Farm, where they have a next generation farming training program for young farmers that want to learn this technique, but don't have anywhere to go to do it. They don't have the land yet. There are resources there to make it happen. And that groundswell from us as individuals, that's going to make the difference. You have that power, right? As much as I'd love to say, go talk at the town council meeting, I think that's going to frustrate you. But I think seeing a friend who used to go to the grocery store and buy conventionally grown vegetables from the other side of the world, getting turned on by the stuff that they can get right here in Hunterdon County or their local community, where they get to meet a farmer and they know that that farmer's farming the right way. That's the good stuff. That's the stuff that builds passion, it builds community, it gets people out of their seats to change. So Sorry, I was a little long-winded on that and passionate about it, but I really do believe that's the best approach.
Here, here. That's, yes. I think sometimes I can get bogged down too in like trying to create this like these huge changes, but really what is most inspiring, like you just said it so great, is having a real tangible effect on the people that we love and that we are really connected to. I think that's great.
And if you look at all the great change that humanity's made throughout history, all of those advances happened from individuals that became groups of individuals that became a groundswell of support that forced the leaders to change. So we are the leaders. Our quote unquote leaders reflect us. They don't actually lead us.
Absolutely. I want to make sure I get everybody's questions before we move on. So one last one is pertaining to doesn't regenerative agriculture sometimes include tillage and plant breakdown by hoof, specific
Yes.
animals allowed to roam amongst trees and planted areas?
Absolutely. On our farm, we practice regenerative agriculture, but like I said, we have to till because we grow small grains. When you have to till or disturb the soil, if you're in a regenerative system, your goal then is to minimize the impact and tread as lightly as you can. And yes, if you're in an animal-based agricultural system, yes, the hoofs of those animals are going to tread on the ground and create disturbances. But there are many great regenerative agriculture systems that include animals because they are taking in things like grasses, they are processing them, they are excreting things that are extremely good for the soil biome, right? So even folks like me who are whole food plant-based and don't eat animals, there is composted chicken manure that we've used on our field. We go and we check out and make sure that the chickens are being handled and raised in a humane way. But yeah, there are definitely reasons for that, even in a regenerative system. You can do regenerative farming with no animal inputs whatsoever. And we're working toward that. We're not there yet. But those types of disturbances that you mentioned are a necessary evil at times. Yes.
Great. Thank you, Jason. I believe that wraps up all the questions we've had so far. So if you want to
Okay.
take it through next.
So now we're going to the subject matter that I've lived the least, right? I'm new to this lifestyle and I didn't expect to be here. Okay. So my story, I'll start with, okay, and then we'll get into the sustainability aspects of this. I have been a competitive athlete since my 20s. I used to race bicycles for distances up to 100 miles. I've been a marathon runner. And the way I found this area of New Jersey, this beautiful area that we all share, was on my long distance bike rides out of Montclair on my training rides. We used to, on some days, turn around on a 100-mile bike ride. We'd come out to the general store right here in Oldwick. And so that's how I knew the beauty and the farmland and the natural places that were out here. But even still, you'd never look at me as someone, like when you see the picture in a minute, I didn't look fat and unhealthy, for lack of a better word. I looked pretty good, I'd like to think, and I was pretty competitive as an athlete. And yet, every year, my cholesterol kept getting higher, okay? And by the spring of last year, 2022, my cholesterol had hit 235. And my primary care doctor said, "You're athletic, you're in good shape, I'm not really worried about you, but if you want, we can put you on a statin." Now, this was coming from a doctor who was, as she told me, pre-diabetic, at least 75 pounds overweight, and had a whole bunch of unhealthy lifestyle things. And I kind of at that moment said, it's time for me to look for another doctor. I want to try to see if I can live in a way that I don't need medicine unless I absolutely need it, right? I'm the son of a physician, a brilliant physician. But if I need to take medicine, I will. But if I can avoid it by simple lifestyle changes, I'd rather do that. Well, this led me to, I had been going up to Ethos Farm Market since Deb and I moved here, because we've eaten organically ever since we've been together, right? It always made sense to us to eat fresh, natural food, not stuff that had been grown with chemicals. And when we first decided we were going to move out here, one of the very first things we did was Google all of the places that we could buy food, and especially organic produce. And Ethos Farm was one of them. And so we were going there regularly, and it was called the Doctor's Farm Market, which seemed a little strange. And there were things up on the wall in the Doctor's Farm Market about the health clinic that he ran, a primary care practice that's also on the same piece of earth as the farm and the farm market. His primary care practice, Dr. Weiss's, is on that farm. He owns a beautiful 340 plus acre farm up in Long Valley. It's one of the most beautiful pieces of property I've ever been on in this area of New Jersey. Anyway, and so over time, I got to know the people and the farmers, and Nora Pugliese, who is an absolutely brilliant organic regenerative farmer, and she manages Ethos Farm. And another beautiful person that manages the neighbor house, which is right next door, Iris. They were there on a day that I happened to buy a big thing of tomatoes. They're having a sale on bulk tomatoes. And I was going to go home and cook tomato sauce with it, pasta sauce. Deb and I have been foodies our whole life. And we traveled all over the world to eat good food. We went to Michelin 3-star restaurants. We were very fortunate to be able to do that. And we would literally go to places just to eat a certain type of food, like go to have truffles in Tuscany in truffle season. That's how important food was to us and how crazy we were about it. We loved wine. We built our house with a wine cellar in it, a very extensive wine cellar in it. So I'm taking these tomatoes and I smile at Nora, and Iris is right next to her, and I say, I'm going to go make pasta sauce. Just a couple of days, and I guess it's probably maybe a month before I had that doctor's meeting. And so in the back of my mind was, I'm still looking for a new doctor. Iris turns to me, or Nora, I can't remember which, honestly. Iris swears it's her. I remember it is Nora. But knowing their personalities, it's probably more Iris that would say, don't use any olive oil with that when you make your pasta sauce. I said, I absolutely will. And she said, it's not healthy. Look it up online. And so I started looking up online, and I found this website, nutritionfacts.org. And lo and behold, even olive oil can actually increase your cholesterol. Really? Because I eat olive oil pretty much like people drink water. I used to have it at breakfast with my homemade bread. I would pour olive oil on it, have some fresh honey on it, and a little sprinkle of salt. An amazing breakfast. Well, part of a breakfast, right? So as I'm walking back to my car with my tomatoes, I put the tomatoes in the car, and who's outside planting flowers on the walkway to his doctor's office but Dr. Weiss. Now, Ron and I had become friendly because we're both local farmers, and I had been to a symposium up at his farm sponsored by New Jersey Audubon. We kept in touch. He liked what we were doing down here. I really admired what they were doing up there in Long Valley. And so I'm walking by, and I walk over to him, and literally it just popped to me like that. And I said, how would you feel about being my physician? And he looked at me and he said, would you listen to me? And I said, yeah, as long as you understand, I'm not going to stop drinking wine and I'm not going to stop eating olive oil. And he smiled at me and he said, I'll show you the science. You decide what you want to do. I said, cool. I went inside. I got the new patient paperwork. I became Dr. Weiss's patient. Okay. My cholesterol was 235 when I went in for my first appointment. I was kind of cocky when he did my blood work. I thought, I'm really healthy. I just a little tweak here or there. Well, it turns out I get my blood work back, and there wasn't just high cholesterol as a cardiac marker. There were like 4 other markers that said you either have early heart disease, very early, mind you, or you're likely to get heart disease later in life. And that blew my mind. And so in that moment, I said, tell me what I can do. And he said, change your diet. Go over from your Mediterranean diet. Now, keep in mind, I wasn't a big cheese eater. I wasn't even a big meat eater. I ate the Mediterranean diet and I ate sensibly. I was the guy that pulled the cheese off the pizza. I was the guy that was running 25 miles a week. I was, quote unquote, the picture of health. And yet I'm staring at this blood work that was anything but. Okay. So I had a choice. Do I start going on meds or do I try to manage this myself through diet? I chose the latter, and I learned about what is called a whole food plant-based lifestyle. And we're going to get to the sustainability, but let me tell you, I love this planet. I love the earth. But man, when I talk about sustainability, I got to say, I want to sustain myself too, right? I don't want to drop dead at 65. So when we talk about sustainable life, as this talk is entitled, part of leading a sustainable life is making sure that you're sustainable, right? And that you're doing no harm to this beautiful earth that we all inhabit. But is it any good if you're helping the earth and you drop dead and you're no longer part of it, right? So sustainability can have multiple meanings. And I wanted a sustainable life in the broadest sense. So this was just an adjunct to it. We talked about sustainable. And we talked about this. So I'm going to skip these slides. And I'm back to here, right? So in this case, rather than waiting for big pharma to prescribe, to have 5 or 6 different pills that I had to take to get rid of these cardiac things or heart disease markers, I decided to try myself with the help of a very experienced team of people. Dr. Weiss has coaches and people that are experienced in lifestyle management that helped me and Deborah also to change the way we ate and lived. So this is us in June of 2022 on the left. I'm not going to tell you how much heavier Deb was in that picture, but I will tell you that I was 30 pounds heavier in that picture than I am on the right. I will also tell you that my cholesterol is now 150. All of those other heart disease markers have either completely disappeared. There's one that has gone from, and that's more of a genetic marker, gone from like caution Will Robinson or danger Will Robinson to it's not really that bad anymore. And as a marathon runner, I am now running 12 years after my fastest marathon. My marathon pace is now well over a full minute faster than it was then when I was training and competing, okay? And it has everything to do with how healthy my cardiovascular system has become because I'm eating plants. So if it sounds like I've drunk the Kool-Aid, I completely have. But it's because I feel incredibly well. If I felt like crap and, my cardiac markers were better, it would be a lot harder for me to stay with this lifestyle, but man, I feel good. So, like I said, in July 2022, Deb and I both changed the way we ate, and we ate a diet entirely based on plants. That's Ron Weiss. That's one of our cover crops in the background when he came to visit the farm this past summer. So a bit more than 4 years ago, we talked about us starting our journey to lead a more sustainable life with the lowest possible impact on Earth. And we talked about these, right? I'm not going to go over them again because this is kind of a bit of a standalone presentation. This exists on the Food Shed Alliance website. It is a former webinar by one of my fellow board members from Ethos Farm to Health, Saul Batista. He's a brilliant young physician, lifestyle medicine doctor, who was trained actually by Dr. Weiss. One of the things that Dr. Weiss's charity, Ethos Farm to Health, does, he has a next generation physicians training program where he trains young lifestyle medicine physicians to treat people holistically with things like diet, exercise, lowering stress, mindfulness, things that we can do to radically change our health without needing medicine. So this is a resource for you there. Ethos Primary Care is right up the road in Long Valley. And even if you just talk to them about this kind of eating and lifestyle, they have a wealth of resources available. And the website has a bunch of resources available. If you're really interested in this stuff, you also can come to Farm Days, which happens up the road at Ethos Farm in September each year. Next September, it's going to be the 14th, 15th of September, 2024. World-renowned speakers on human health, regenerative agriculture, they all converge on that farm. I'll be there, by the way, not as a speaker necessarily, but as part of it. They all converge on Ron's farm. And this past year, there were 450 people there, and some of the most important voices in eating this way. And Rich Roll was one of them this past year. So that's another great resource for you. The National Health Association. Incredible people, and an organization that's been promoting whole food, plant-based diet and lifestyle since 1948. Right? They have a bunch of podcasts, resource materials. They've got an amazing annual meeting out in Ohio in June. The people that run it are fantastic. It comes with a magazine that's wonderful. This you can pick up at Whole Foods. Okay, this is the most current issue. Forks Over Knives. If you just want to be dabbling this way and reduce your impact on the planet a little bit, by eating less animal, meat and things like that, make several meals a week. These recipes that are in this magazine are really easy to follow. It's easy to start to learn to cook in a different way, and your body and the planet will thank you for it. Both of them will be more sustainable. I think that's it in terms of slides for that. But what I'll add is, I want to just come back to I'm going to leave this up here. While we talk, the single biggest cause of climate change, sadly, is animal agriculture. Because we have, as a species, created incredible traditions around the way we eat. And a lot of them, especially in Western culture, involve meat. Now, we were not designed biologically necessarily to eat meat. We were gatherers, okay, that ate mostly plants. Every once in a while, we'd be fortunate enough to get some animal protein and eat it. There's this myth that we can't eat enough protein without eating animals. And that is an absolute myth. There is a great movie called The Game Changers, which is about some of the highest performing, most competitive athletes in the world who went over to a whole food plant-based diet and became far more competitive than they were beforehand, and they don't eat any meat. And there's that saying, right? You know, I'm strong as an ox. Oxes don't eat meat. Bulls, they're rippling with muscles. Horses, they're rippling with muscles. They don't eat meat, they eat plants. So there's no trouble with getting enough protein to build muscle mass with plants. When we're talking about sustainability outside of ourselves, and we're talking about environmentally, the inputs that go into animal agriculture, okay, create a need to grow food, right? The animals need to eat food. And we'll talk about pasture-raised, humanely raised stuff in a second. Because one thing I'm not going to do, I'm not going to sit here and say, like, we're friends with the Vogelaar family over at Riverbed Farm, and they practice animal agriculture. They do it locally. They do it with organic regenerative principles. They're beautiful people, and their meats are incredible if you're a meat eater. And if they weren't doing that on that land would probably be a housing development, right? So there's some very, very positive things there. That said, that is really the minority in terms of the way agriculture is practiced globally. Most animal agriculture is factory-based, taking up huge amounts of land, requiring deforestation, requiring tons of feed for animals to eat, and that feed has to come from things that we grow, right? So if you think about it, our farm used to grow GMO corn, which could be used as animal feed, right? Instead, it now grows wheat or oats or rye that you and I can directly eat. So all of the calories produced on our farm can go directly to feeding humans. If I inserted the middleman into it, which is the animal then needs to eat that food, and then we need to eat the animal. It's just, as I mentioned earlier, a horribly, horribly inefficient system, right? So there is probably not a way that we can feed 10 billion people on this planet with animal agriculture the way it is now, because there's just not enough land. And the way animal agriculture is typically done creates a tremendous amount of toxic wastes that has to be gotten rid of. So we will poison our environment, we will poison the land, and we will not have enough of it, right? That's where we're headed. And I hate to sound doom and gloom, because it really doesn't have to be that way. The reality of it is, if we cut out the middleman, and we don't have to do it by becoming like Deborah and me as people who eat plants exclusively. It's, again, if you have a piece of lawn and you take that and you make part of it managed with native plants and with ground covers that are not monoculture, and you're just thoughtful, some of the time, you do tremendous good. So there's a saying that the way we're going to heal the planet and the way we're going to stop or even turn back global warming is by the majority of the people eating plants more, as opposed to a minority of the people eating plants exclusively. So just think about that along with this slide and the power that you have, because the science is there. And I didn't have time to make enough slides on this, but we can literally reverse global warming if we get a high enough percentage of human beings getting their calories directly from plants, because we would be able to reforest certain areas. We could manage the land far better, far less disruptively, and all of that land that we could give back to nature can become a carbon sink instead of deforesting land in the Amazon so that we can raise cattle, so that we can provide food for people that want to eat meat, right? I didn't know any of this. I was an environmentalist my whole life. We spent a lot of money building our sustainable homestead. And yet, just by changing over to eating plants exclusively, Deborah and I have literally done more for global sustainability than at least everything we did for the house and probably everything we did with permaculture and native plants as well, combined. That's the order of magnitude that our eating habits create on a global scale. When there were 10 million of us on the planet, it did not matter. With 8 billion, trying to get to 10, it makes a big impact. So I will both open it up to questions and also to Dr. Weiss, who happens to be on the call, if there's anything that you'd like to add, Ron. And I apologize in advance for not being nearly as eloquent as you are, and in not having as many colorful slides and things about this topic, about which I am not as much an expert. But if I'm giving a talk on leading a sustainable life from this point forward and not pointing out how oblivious I was as a lifelong environmentalist to the very most significant thing I could personally do towards this thing that I feel so passionate about, I'd be remiss. So I gave it my best shot.
Well, if I can just say one thing, and that is that perhaps one of the most important things I have done in my life as a physician for this planet and for the environment is to help guide you and Deb to change your lives, because look at what you've done.
Thank you.
You guys are going to, I estimate you will be super centenarians. You will help us to create a new blue zone in New Jersey, and you will be modeling this way of life for, the next 40 or 50 years and impacting people in such a magnificent way. That I consider to be my greatest legacy, just to have had an influence on you. It's not necessarily to clean out someone's coronary arteries or to prevent cancer. Through your generosity, you let me help you, and this is the result. So
Wow.
I thank you for bringing meaning to my life as a physician, but through your dedication.
Well, I can't say thank you enough, Ron. I'm blown away, hugely humbled. And at the same time, Deb and I feel very similarly. For those of you listening, if it sounds like a mutual admiration society, I'm not easily impressed.
It is.
It is. I'm not easily impressed, and I'm also not someone prone to fad or someone prone to just whimsically doing something like, I think I'm going to completely change the way I eat. I researched it as passionately and in as much depth as I did every aspect of regenerative farming, permaculture, building this home, solar power, geothermal. And as I kicked the tires, I came to find that the science was unequivocally there. It's not subject to debate, question. Yes, if you have pseudoscience and people with alternative agendas who want to push, economic agendas that are beneficial to them or lifestyles that they live that they would really miss, yes, you're going to have some good arguments. But if you look at the core science of human health and global environmental health, it's there. And I've always been a scientifically minded person. And it was like a light switch moment. But the other thing I'll say is, having been in this community now and researched the people in it, to have someone of Dr. Weiss's caliber right 10 miles away from Colebrook Farm is a gift. It's a gift that Deb and I didn't know we had, and it has profoundly changed us. We can work 3 times as long on the farm without getting tired as we could a year and a half ago. We get more joy in each day because I don't wake up with those arthritic hands that I used to have. I run faster, I run longer, I'm happier. It really is a testament to our bodies liking this way of eating. And, so I'm incredibly thankful and humbled. And that's why I'm willing to go out on a limb and say stuff like this, because it's not always popular to be the person in the room pointing out that your very activity, the activity that you used to live, really had a profoundly negative impact on both yourself and those things that you hold dear. And it changes you. So anyway, questions?
This has been so fantastic, and I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. Just to everyone who has been asking, that the recording will be available and sent out to everyone. I think everyone, including myself, is just blown away by the passion and inspiration that we've gotten from your presentation today, Jason and Deb. Like, thank you so much. Sandy says, when is your cookbook going to come out?
Well, we probably ultimately will do one. As foodies who have really changed the way we've eaten, we probably will. It's probably several years away because some of the earth problems are pressing enough that we spend a lot of time working on them. But if we can put together a cookbook that people can use and be excited about, that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world either, because then they can make some incremental change. And like I said, please don't feel like anything we've done, like, I tend to go all in with things, as I guess you can gather, but take a little snippet of anything that we've done here or anything that we've talked about and make it your own, right? And every one of those is a multiplier effect of what we can do as individuals. That's why this is the last slide up on the screen. We can't forget that. It's easy to become hopeless because we get a barrage of negative feedback from the news, from our political leaders. All we hear is, it's hopeless. It's not. It's not at all. I mean, we can make tremendously positive change just amongst the people that were on this webinar today. And if we tell 2 people and they tell 2 people, any one of these things, you know what? If you're thinking about buying a new car, heck, buy an electric car. Even though that was number 4 on the list, it's better than buying another gas car, right? You can put a solar panel or 2 on your house. It's better than your house was tomorrow. It's more efficient. If you go out and you're at a good restaurant and you see a decent vegan menu option, have that instead of a steak. Do it once or twice a week. Pat yourself on the back. You're moving things forward. That's the way change happens. You don't have to, have a light switch moment like I happen to have had in a couple of instances. But maybe you'll end up there too, and that'd be great. Because the more you do, the more you're leading a sustainable life.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This is
Thank you.
really just such an inspiring talk, and I appreciate everyone for joining us and staying on for this time. And
Yeah, I'm sorry I ran so over.
oh my gosh, please don't be. This was really great, and the passion you have for all of these subjects really shines through, and I so appreciate your time. And Deb, thank you for joining us and jumping in the chat and helping me with that. So
My pleasure. My pleasure.
thank
And
you.
Tess,
Yeah.
thank you to you and the Food Shed Alliance, because the work you're doing, it's right on the pathway. I mean, it's just what we all need to be knowing and need to be doing. And you got a great group doing great things, and we are so appreciative of it.
Yeah, I'm so grateful to work with
I was
everyone.
on
And you
this
know,
thing. I was
the-
on this thing. It was supposed to be from 6:30 till 7.
What do you
It's
think?
just finishing up. Oh, you know about this whole lifestyle and sustainability and environmental and
Marion,
so
we hear you.
yes,
So we hope you
so
enjoyed
great.
it. Thank you for staying with us.
Yeah, and I just want to also remind everybody that if you do have any follow-up questions or anything like that, please feel free to reach out to me or to Jason directly. And the recording will be available on our website, and I will certainly send the link directly to everybody who have registered. So
Great. We will
thank you.
we'll also get around to posting it on both our Instagram as well as our Colebrook Farm website, which doesn't get updated as often as it should because there's a few other things to do. Anyway, thank you again, Tess. And thanks everybody for spending the time with us, and thanks for caring enough to actually make a difference.
Yes. Cheers to
Jason,
that.
Deb, it's Eric. Thank you so much. So amazing. I really appreciate you.
You're incredibly welcome, Eric. You guys are phenomenal and you're an inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Take care, guys. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.